Welcome to another edition of Drugs, Crime, and Politics, brought to you by the Drug Policy Forum of Texas. Good evening, I'm your host, Buford Terrell, and tonight we're going to try to put a face on the world of radio. So joining me is Dean Becker of the Drug Truth Network from Pacifica Radio.
Thank you, Buford. It's a treat to be here with you. There's so much we can talk about.
There really is, and I think one of the things that kind of keeps my courage up and my heart in the game is that every time we do a show, there are more and more things that look kind of good that have been happening.
This is true. There's that old phrase, 2 steps forward, 1 step back. We still got the 1 step back once in a while, but we do have occasional 2 steps forward. You're right. You're right.
Yeah.
One that caught my attention, and maybe some of the viewers don't know about, we're now up to 17 of our United States that allow, or say they will allow, for medical marijuana.
Let's put it this way, have passed state statutes.
Yes.
Recognizing the use of medical marijuana.
Right. So many of them are not in play as yet.
Yeah.
Connecticut, though, is the 17th, just last week.
17th. And, you know, there's a lot going on in Massachusetts right now, particularly in the legislature. So it looks like all of New England basically is in the club.
Right.
But
you know, as restrictive or onerous or slow going as some of these processes for these medical marijuana states are, it is good that despite the fact the U.S. government is still protesting this advance, is still trying to quash that effort, these states still keep doing it nonetheless. I think that's good.
Yeah, and if we look at the 3 legalizing, with quotes around those words, states that have been the most recalcitrant, and that would be Arizona, New Jersey, and Michigan. It looks as if Michigan is about ready to get their act together and start functioning as best they can. Been a couple of recent state court opinions up there that have gotten rid of some of the roadblocks. Arizona, surprisingly, looks like it's going to have a successful rollout of its program within a few months.
Now, do they have it where they have 6 or so grow sites and then it's going to be distributed by the state?
Not exactly. And they also have exceptions for people that live more than so many miles.
That they can grow their own?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And New Jersey, the outgoing governor 2 years ago signed the bill into law his last day in office. And their current governor has done everything he can do to keep it from being effective. He's a former U.S. prosecutor.
He's got a reputation to uphold.
But there has been quite a bit of progress. The people of the state seem pretty well unified behind it. And I expect to see some sort of breakthrough there within a few months at most.
Well, I spoke with Ken Walski. He's a registered nurse up in New Jersey, and he was talking about the fact that it's been 2.5 years since the bill was passed or the vote was cast, and that he thinks it's going to fall in place before the end of this year.
I think he's right.
And that we were talking earlier about, you know, how the slow process for many of these New England states to get things rolling, that through the combined efforts of all these various legislatures, perhaps they will all now reach that finish line about the same time. It's just a guess.
Well, as I understand the law that Connecticut has passed, though, they may have tried to be too cautious and built a real roadblock in their law that means the legislature is going to have to go back and redo it. Because as I understand it, they require the marijuana to be dispensed through pharmacists.
Through, oh boy.
And under federal law, that just can't be done. A pharmacist who tried to dispense marijuana according to a doctor's directive would risk losing his ability to sell any controlled substance. And since that includes all tranquilizers, all anti-anxiety medication, all pain medication, all medication for ADHD, I don't know of many pharmacists that would be willing
they can't
to risk taking that kind of hits.
Well, you pointed out something the other day. We were talking about it on the email list.
Yeah.
You were at your local pharmacy. You found out the price of was it Desoxin,
which is, by the way, methamphetamine. And I like to take every opportunity I can to remind people that methamphetamine is regularly prescribed by regular doctors for children. It's one of the standard treatments for attention deficit disorder syndrome.
Right, and it's not a Schedule I drug like heroin.
It's a Schedule II like cocaine and morphine.
And heroin, yes. Well, but and here I've fessed up many a time. I'm going to do it again. I've done a lot of speed in my day. Back in the 60s and 70s in particular, we were doing the biker meth. We were getting prescriptions for Desoxin, the very pills you're talking about. We'd soak them in water and inject them. And I don't recommend it. I think it's a horrible drug, certainly in the long run, though it has its benefits, like when our Air Force pilots are flying across the globe to drop their bombs on a foreign nation. That's what they take to keep them alert and viable.
During the Gulf War of 1990, the Air Force Surgeon General reported that over 60% of the combat air missions were flown by plane crews using amphetamines during the flight.
But, you know, it just dawned on me, one of the horrible complications of methamphetamine, I've looked back at it, you know, from a distance of years, decades actually, and it's not that the drug itself is so horrible, it is the circumstance by which it is acquired, by which it is used, and let me outline what I mean there. There is a mad rush to obtain the drugs. There is then a mad rush to get your fair share. And if that means if you're living with a bunch of other people, it's to use your fair share before it's used by others around you. And it's one of the you know, the fallout positions on drug prohibition is that there is a frenzy around that drug use. The moment it is acquired, people take as much as they can. They've been waiting. They want to use it before others do, and it leads to complications.
And not only before others do. You can't leave it in your shirt pocket for tomorrow night.
Right, because it becomes evidence if you're pulled over. So you're right, a mad rush to get rid of the evidence. Yes.
Many years ago, when I was a teenager in Lubbock, Texas, and Lubbock was still bone dry at that time, when us high school kids got some beer or some real whiskey on occasion, if you got a case of beer, you drank the whole thing. If you got a fifth of whiskey, you drank the whole thing. Why? Because you couldn't take it home, you didn't have any place to put it. And the same thing. It's
evidence. Let's get rid of it quick as we can. Yeah, and that's the one of the parts of the folly of prohibition, that it just leads to mad frenzies like that. And speaking of which, I don't know if this is something you want to bring up necessarily, but we had the story last week of the face-eating zombie. We've had stories of people eating others' brains and I don't know, the chewing off lips and all of these other things. And as always, those in authority tend to want to attribute this this action to drug use without knowing anything to the contrary, but just assuming immediately that it is drug use. It reminds me of the story back in the 20s. Harry J. Anslinger heard of a family being killed in Florida, and by a young son of the family with an axe, and he tried to attribute that to marijuana use, led him to kill his family. though it was later determined there was no correlation whatsoever.
And the young man had already been in a psychiatric hospital at least once before that. But I got to thinking about it. Here we have, and I believe bath salts are what they're playing with now.
Mephedrone, if I remember.
That the bath salts usually are chewing another guy's face off.
Yeah.
If you go back 20 years, it was the guy high on PCP who had the strength of millions and never knew when he'd been shot, and he'd run amok and tear up a whole police force. And you go back even further to the 1900s when the Southern sheriffs talked about the blacks crazed on cocaine that would run around raping white women. And
impenetrable to 32 caliber bullets. And
they were so energized by this drug that a normal police gun wouldn't kill them, and the cops had to go to bigger guns.
Well, and again, the LSD craze of the 70s, say, led them to move from the 38s up to the 45s and the 9mm and all that. And now they're up to M16s.
We can also throw in from the 19-teens and 20s, Fu Manchu and the crazy Chinese bandits, wild from opium. Of course, opium puts you to sleep.
Well, but don't let truth get in the way there. I mean,
while I'm on a roll, let's go back to the original story, the story of the assassins.
Oh, yeah.
The Hashishins. In about the 13th century or so, that the old man of the mountain had a tribe of crazed killers that he would give hashish or marijuana to and turn them loose to go out and kill and
his enemies.
It turns out that, yes, he did use hashish to recruit his band. He would give them enough pot to smoke, or they weren't smoking, they were eating it, until they passed out and went to sleep. While they were asleep, he would move them into the very fancy gardens of his castle. When they woke up, he would tell them, "This is a foretaste of heaven, and if you do battle like I tell you to, if you die, you immediately go to a heaven much nicer than this." So even the original crazed killer was really put them to sleep and tell them lies.
Well, Buford, there was a story caught my attention late last week. We hear all the horror stories, 50, maybe 55,000 now dead in Mexico. And the story that really tugged at my heart, it turns out that for about 100 years now, up in the mountains of the Sierra Madre, there are these little ranchitos where very primitive farmers grow the marijuana that a lot of folks here in America smoke. And they'd been under the protection of the Sinaloa cartel, have been since day one, and Mr. Shorty Guzman. But now the Zetas are sneaking up into these ranchitos. They're killing the male farmers. They're driving the women and children off the land. The LA Times said 15,000 families, and that's big families. That's probably 10 times as many people coming north. This one family they talked to, on one day 5 male members of that family were killed. They were panicking. 2 days later, another 5 male members were killed, and they left. And I guess it just, they are so primitive. They don't have running water. They use pine tar for light. They don't even have electricity. Very, very primitive. Very.
And I think we also need to point out that the last figures I've seen, if you buy it harvested and bundled at the farm, you can buy that Mexican marijuana for about $25 a pound. And by the time it passes through all of the syndicates and gets to the street corner in Houston, it's up to 10 times that much an ounce.
Yeah.
And it's time for us to take a break, and who knows what Dean and I will talk about when we come back.
We'd love to hear from you when we do.
Yeah.
Hey, this is Tommy Chong, and you're watching Drugs, Crime, and Politics.
Welcome back to Drugs, Crime, and Politics, where tonight we're chatting with Dean Becker. I want to remind everyone that this is your show. We always love to hear from you. So if you have a question or a comment, please call us at the number on the screen, and you can be on the show with us for a minute or so. If you're watching this on any kind of a delayed basis over the internet, you can email me at the address given, and I'll respond to you quickly. We might use your material on the next show as well. During the break, I was reminded about our friends from Dallas.
Oh yeah, winning the second place in the
free speech category for the art car parade.
And that art car parade's starting to reach out around the country. A lot of folks know what it is, know what we do here now.
Well, it's justly famous. And this year, the Cannabis Caravan and the art car parade had 5 entries in it. So.
It's looking pretty good on screen, I'll tell you. Yeah. You know, you were talking about folks calling in, and I think that's important. I mean, I do, you know, my shows on Sunday night there on KPFT. We don't get as many calls as I'd like when we do open up the lines. Maybe it's because we hardly ever do it and folks just aren't ready. But what Buford and I both are doing is trying to educate you, maybe not even educate you. I wear this LEAP shirt on the back. Cops say legalize drugs, ask me why.
Yeah.
In over a year, nobody's asked me why, because I think more and more folks now understand the nature of this drug war, the futility, the failure of it all, and maybe don't even need that education so much, but you do need to have enough information to feel comfortable in going forth boldly and speaking up and standing up where necessary.
Well,
because, go ahead.
I'm not going to be quite as adamant about Dean, about trying to teach you something. I spent 30 years teaching people things for a living, but the thing that I found out's most important is that it's through the telephone and through the questions that I get taught.
Well, there you go.
And, You know, the way I learn things is for someone to ask me about it or tell me something. And the more I can learn, the better job I can do. So it's a mutual education process.
Well, I'm with you there, and you're right. I do learn from my listeners too. Buford, you know, I can't remember when this last drugs, crime, politics was, but the president got, I'll say exposed, but folks were pointing out the fact that when he was in his high school and college years, he and his buddies hit the Choom gang, I think they called it, the Choom gang. What Choom means to smoke marijuana. You want to choom some, I believe.
Yeah.
They were very adamant about getting their fair share of marijuana. Obama would walk around the circle and intercept, as he called it, get a second hit from the passing of that joint. When they rode around in their van, when it was put out, and they would sniff the top of the van trying to get every last molecule of that smoke. Anyway, well, I'll finish that later. We've got a call. Let's see what they've got to say.
Hello, caller. You're on the air.
Evening, Buford. This is Clay.
Yes, Clay.
Hello, Clay.
Yeah, I got to get outside. I'm sorry. I forgot to turn my TV down.
Okay.
Okay, I'm outside.
Okay.
Listen, you know, as well as there's a lot of wonderful things happening around the country. You got Connecticut. I don't like the law that they enacted, but they enacted it, and it's better than having nothing. Yeah. But I've noticed that the feds are starting to become more hardcore on their busts, that everybody in Montana is going to jail. If they're not in jail, they're in the process of getting sentenced. And in California, their busts are bringing charges to people now. What do you make of that?
Okay, Clay, that's a good question. And what I make of that, and this is going to sound silly, it's the desperate flailing of a guy that knows he's drowning. And part of what almost no one understands is that the president has very, very, very little control over the U.S. attorneys. And there are 90-some odd of them. And each one is kind of like a little demigod in his district. And these are guys that for years and years and years have been working hand in glove as partners with the DEA. So to some extent, what we find is the DEA locally screaming and raising hell, and the U.S. attorneys, who very frequently have offices just across the hall from them, in fact, listen and go out and do something about it. That's part of it. The other part, and this was a rather surprising silver lining I found, the Ninth Circuit just upheld a U.S. magistrate in dismissing the marijuana possession charges against an individual for possession of marijuana on federal property when the guy was caught with a joint, I think, in a national forest. So what is happening, slowly but surely, the federal judges who live in the same cities that everyone else lives in are starting to realize that they've been fed a bill of goods as well.
You know, we talked about, you know, 2 steps forward, 1 step back. One of the steps back is that some of the landlords who have been renting to the dispensaries, I think at least one now has been convicted and sentenced or pending sentence for his guiltiness. And another step forward I'd like to remind you of, I know you're well aware, but the U.S. attorney who was responsible for convicting Mr. Mark Emery of selling marijuana seeds to U.S. citizens has now come full cycle and is calling for legalization of marijuana.
Yeah, but I think for some time now I've been arguing that the only meaningful marijuana law reform has to take place through Congress. Nothing else is going to do the trick. And what's happening, if we look at California and Colorado, and these are the states that have had the most aggressive and the most successful medical marijuana implementations. It's not just the DEA, it's not just the drug laws that are coming into play, or the marijuana growers and users that are coming into play. But marijuana dispensers are finding that banks will not open checking accounts for them because that makes the banks violative of money laundering statutes.
They don't seem to mind for the drug cartels, but go ahead.
Well, the drug cartels are a little bit more sneaky about it.
Okay. No,
they use Mr. Romney's bank in the Cayman Islands for one thing.
Yeah, there's bigger boys.
Landlords are finding that if they rent property to a marijuana dispensary, they can be found guilty of a conspiracy and their property forfeited under the continuing criminal enterprise statute. Marijuana dispensers are finding out that yes, the income tax law requires them to report their income and pay taxes on it. After all, remember, that's what Al Capone went to prison for. But the Internal Revenue Code will not allow them to deduct their normal and necessary business expenses. So they can't deduct their rent, they can't deduct the cost of the product they buy, they can't deduct the salaries they pay to any of their employees because of a law that makes good sense in some ways. You shouldn't allow a bank robber to deduct the cost of his bullets as a necessary business expense. You're finding that college students can't live on campus because the colleges all receive federal money in one way or another. The most important is direct aid to students through Pell Grants or government guaranteed loans. And if the school does not have a drug-free campus policy and enforce it, then all of the federal funding to the school can be cut off. So the problem is it's not just the Controlled Substances Act we all worry about. It's that the drug law has stuck its tentacles into everything it takes
to perpetuate itself, right?
Everything it takes to do any kind of business.
Well, Ethan Nadelman, the director of the Drug Policy Alliance, he was in Oslo, Norway last week at the Oslo Forum, and he spoke in depth about the global scale of what you're talking about here. How it is the U.S. That mandates that all of these other countries try to emulate what we do here in these United States insofar as the drug war. And it's the old silver or the lead. We'll give you money if you'll, you know, make sure you're trying to make it drug-free, or we'll penalize you and put you on the less favored nation's status if you don't. It's the silver or the lead. And it's
actually, it's beginning to look like some of the South American countries are going to say, keep your dirty dollars, we don't need them.
Well, somebody needs to stand up.
And I don't think it's going to be very long before some country like Holland withdraws from the narcotics conventions and says we don't accept those as law anymore. We talk too much. It's time to take another break.
Hope they give us a call when we come back. We'd love to hear from you, truly.
This week in drug war history, June 1st, 1996. Noted actor and hemp activist Woody Harrelson was arrested and charged with cultivation of less than 5 marijuana plants after he planted 4 industrial hemp seeds in full view of Lee County Sheriff William Kilburn in Lexington, Kentucky. June 3rd, 1876. At the Centennial Exposition in Philadelphia, America's first 100-year birthday bash, fairgoers visit the Turkish Hashish Exposition and toke up in order to enhance their fair experience. June 8, 1993. William F. Buckley in an interview said, "The amount of money and of legal energy being given to prosecute hundreds of thousands of Americans who are caught with a few ounces of marijuana in their jeans simply makes no sense. The kindest way to put it. A sterner way to put it is that it is an outrage and imposition on basic civil liberties and on the reasonable expenditures of social energy." June 11, 2001. The U.S. Supreme Court rules that the use by the police of a thermal imaging device to detect patterns of heat coming from a private home is a search that requires a warrant. June 13, 1994. The Rand Corporation releases a study finding that drug treatment is 7 times more cost-effective than law enforcement for reducing cocaine use. June 14, 2000. Best-selling author, cancer and AIDS patient, and high-profile medical marijuana activist Peter McWilliams is found dead in his Los Angeles, California home. Barred by a federal court order from using marijuana to counteract the extreme nausea caused by his AIDS drugs, McWilliams choked to death on his own vomit slumped on the bathroom floor. His federal prosecutors said they were saddened by his death. June 15, 1998. Random House publishes Mike Gray's Drug Crazy, How We Got Into This Mess and How We Can Get Out. This is Steve Nolan for the Drug Truth Network.
You're watching the Drug, Crime, and Politics show. I need less business. Help change the laws. Fewer people locked up for this foolishness will help all of us.
About Ray.
Welcome back to Drugs, Crime, and Politics. Tonight it's known as the Buford and Dean Show.
That's it.
This is probably a good time to give you my book review of the evening. Tonight's choice is a little bit lighter than many of the books we've looked at. It's by Mark Haskell Smith. It's called Heart of Dankness. Smith starts out to find, first, what is the dankest weed in the world, and second, what does dank really mean? And this is a delightful romp through a couple of turns at the Cannabis Cup in Amsterdam, some of the really high-class boutique grow operations in California, cannabis carnivals in Barcelona and Toronto, another trip back to the Cannabis Cup, and it ends up with a whole lot of people well stoned in the book. Some people pretty satisfied, and Mr. Smith still doesn't know exactly what dankness means. But this is one that is just plain fun to read, and maybe you can come up with a definition that will suit him.
Yeah. I don't know if I could define it exactly. You know, that reminds me a little bit, a couple of weeks back I interviewed this guy, J.R. Helton, wrote a book called simply Drugs.
Yeah.
And it's a novel, but talking to him away from the radio, he admitted much of it was true.
Yeah.
And they kind of went through, you know, they talk about gateway drugs. Well, he started out with tobacco. Yeah. And then alcohol, and then he got into weed, and into barbiturates and downers, and speed and cocaine, and he was kind of, his progression was slow. He told me off the line that he now likes a little bit of psychedelics, doesn't hardly do much of anything else.
Yeah.
And you know, it kind of, it showed the good, the bad, and the ugly, the horrible things that can happen to you, the good things, and just the mundane. It was a pretty good book. But it kind of paralleled what you were talking about, I think, you know, searching for dankness.
You know, the longer I stay in this and look at it, the more I'm convinced that drugs don't do anything.
Right.
that I can take a hammer, and if I'm not there, that hammer's just going to sit on the tabletop. But when I come along, I can pick that hammer up, and I can drive a nail with it, or I can bonk you on the head with it,
Yeah.
or I can sit there and bonk myself on the head with it.
Yeah.
And none of it's the hammer's fault.
No, Dr. Joel Hockman, he's now passed on. He was head of the American Pain Doctors Association.
Yeah.
He had a phrase he used that was something like, if your kid dies from a drug overdose, the drugs didn't take him. He took the drugs.
Well,
it's the
yeah.
fault of the individual, the human.
Well, I'm not even going to say fault on it.
No.
And one of the things that keeps coming back to me the more I look at it is I'm pretty convinced now with some of the science I've been reading that we almost know enough today that a good pediatrician can talk to a 9-year-old and come up with a pretty damn good idea whether that kid's going to have some sort of trouble with some sort of substance as he grows up or not. And for about 90% of the people, yeah, they need to be educated about drugs. They need to know that if you have more than a couple of drinks of alcohol, you don't want to drive that car. They need to know that if you take way, way, way too much of an opiate, you may kill yourself. They need to be educated about drugs. But for that 90%, much of it, we can just simply let them alone. The secret is we need to figure out how to conclusively determine that 10% that's at risk early enough so that we can give them the extra help and guidance it takes to avoid the messes.
Yeah.
And I've also become more and more convinced that an addiction to chocolate or sex or gambling is just as real as an addiction to tobacco or alcohol or heroin.
It's just somehow more socially acceptable.
Yeah, and there's not the same kind of villain that we can. When I say that, I keep thinking about New York City's new anti-drug law.
Or the 16-ounce
The
Coke.
one that makes it illegal to sell any sugar beverage larger than 16 ounces.
Yeah, and I heard, it was a Bloomberg, he said, I'm not saying you can't have more, I'm just saying we're going to force you to get 2 cups. And I'm thinking, how crazy is that?
No, there's a lot of sense to that.
Okay.
Let's say that you go in to some place and you're thirsty, you're going to eat, so you order a big drink. You get a 20 or even a 40-ounce cold drink.
They got them up to 64.
I know,
yeah.
but you get it, you're going to drink a good part of it.
Yeah.
If you went in there and they sold you a 16-ounce one, you'd go sit down at the table and drink it, and it's a whole lot of trouble to get up and go up and order another one. Anything that we can move out of the habit
Into more
category into
more cognitive.
you have to make a conscious decision to do it category.
Yeah.
We're in good shape. And
Yeah.
if you want to buy 3 16-ounce soft drinks, go ahead.
Get you one of them carriers, I guess. Carry them around. I think often of the, I don't know, the attempt anyway to make us all similar, make us all more identical,
Yeah.
if you will. And I think part of that endeavor compels a certain, maybe I'm part of that 10% you're talking about, but it compels certain of us to object, to find a way to work around that pronouncement, that dictation of what we need to do.
And I'm one of those that you can't tell me what to do. I'm going to do what I want to.
Yeah.
But I also know that on 99% of the day-to-day life decisions, I'm also lazy enough to go with the flow.
Well, as are we all.
Would I buy a 16-ounce Coke, or would I go to the trouble to buy 2 16-ounce Cokes?
Yeah.
Chances are, most of the time, I'd buy one and be satisfied with it.
Yeah. Well,
and
at least nobody will have to go to jail, I guess. I guess. Yeah.
So, you know, what's lacking in a lot of the law and the regulation, and the users, is common sense.
Yeah.
I don't know why they call it common, because it's awfully rare.
Well, you know, earlier I was complaining that, you know, the media doesn't quite get it, though I want to renege on that a bit, and that is the Guardian newspaper, The Economist.
Yeah.
Maybe they have different editors on different days or whatever, but some days they certainly sound like they get it, and you know, are speaking rather boldly of that need for change, the drastic.
Yeah.
You know.
Well, actually, I'm going to give some credit locally. I think the Chronicle editorial board is a whole lot more sensitive to the issues now.
And just today they replaced the managing editor of the Chronicle.
Okay. I've not heard that one yet. But,
right.
Yeah. But, you know, it's been more of a softening of an attitude instead of an outright change of stance yet. But
well, I agree. There have been some good editorials.
Yeah.
What's Bill King, the columnist, has had some great columns.
Yeah.
He's actually going to be my guest this coming Sunday, by the way, on KPFT 630 90.1 FM.
I may have to email you some questions to use for that one.
Do. I mean, you know, the fact of the matter is, as a LEAP speaker, as a former cop, member of Law Enforcement Against Prohibition, we speak boldly of this need for change, that we don't want to you know, lead people to doing drugs. What we want to do is take away the dangers, to you know, eliminate the profits for these barbarous cartels, take away the reason for which most of these 30,000 violent gangs exist for here in the United States. And I guess what I'm trying to say is we, you know, we don't quite hear the same message coming from the Chronicle or even the Economist, but it's getting close to the lead position. Closer every week, I think.
And even George Will.
Yeah, you're right.
Came around.
3 or 4 weeks ago, he had a super column. He did.
Well, he still is swallowing a lot of the official line, but his basic attitude was it hadn't worked.
Nope, and not much likelihood that it will. Yeah.
But no, there are some real changes there.
Right.
Well, who do you have coming up in the next couple of weeks that look exciting?
Well, I mean, that's the only one I got pegged at the moment.
Okay.
But every week I do get a report from Terry Nelson. He's a guy with 33 years experience as a Customs, Border, Air Interdiction officer for the government. He gives me a weekly report. Yeah, he retired as a GS-14, the equivalent of a bird colonel.
Yeah.
And every week now, I'm proud of that one. Mary Jane Borden with Drug War Facts, she produces a report. This past week, she did one. What was the question? For how long have people been using drugs? And she goes to the UNODC and gets their quotes and, you know, lists it out for us. Apparently for coca, not cocaine, but for coca, it's about 20,000 years.
I can see that she and I might have arguments about how long people have been in South America. But,
well, okay.
But except for the Eskimos, I'm not sure that anyone has ever found a human society that did not use some kind of intoxicant.
And the only reason the Eskimos didn't, tell them.
Is too damn cold to grow anything up there. But on the other hand, if you take some Lapps and some of the herders in Siberia, these guys were the original yellow snow eaters.
Okay.
because
Oh, boy.
agaric mushrooms,
Yeah.
the psychedelic ones,
Right.
reindeers love to eat them.
Mm.
The Lapps found out about it. They also found out how, and don't ask me how they discovered this, that very, very, very little of it was metabolized when it went through the body,
Right.
and that they could collect the reindeer urine, drink it, and get the full effect of the psychedelic mushrooms.
Wow. Yeah, who figured that one out?
I don't know. Let's take another break and come back and see what we have to wrap it up with tonight.
The whole idea of a drug-free America and zero tolerance really doesn't make much sense, does it? So it does make sense, however, to find ways to reduce the harms associated with drugs. And that's what I want to talk about.
To start thinking about whether it is really laws that make the difference on whether people use drugs or not.
Al Capone didn't shoot people because he was intoxicated.
Right, exactly.
Those people are not fighting over drugs, they're fighting over money.
Drug laws have no basis in science. Drug laws are based on politics and money.
So there's this unholy symbiosis between, on the one hand, those who are selling illegal drugs, the drug lords, if you will, and on the other side, the drug warriors.
War on drugs isn't working, and that, if anything, is just making what we call the drug problem a lot worse.
The jury right to say not guilty is an essential safeguard against injustice, which dates back to English common law and the founding of the United States. Jurors in early 19th century America routinely refused to enforce the Alien and Sedition Act, and they rejected the Fugitive Slave Act. Jurors in early 20th century America refused to enforce alcohol prohibition. The injustices of the war on drugs have become obvious to many Americans. In cases where the law, prosecutorial excesses, and the likely sentence seem manifestly unfair, jury nullification ensures the citizen juror a more equal status with those who write the laws. Please visit the Fully Informed Jury Association, FIJA.org. Please keep such decisions private. Nullification is your right, your responsibility, perfectly legal and just.
Hi, I'm Ethan Nadelman, the founder and executive director of the Drug Policy Alliance. You're watching Drugs, Crimes, and Politics. Hope you enjoy it.
Welcome back to Drugs, Crime, and Politics. You know, one of the things, Dean, that we wanted to talk about tonight, and we haven't mentioned, there was a rather surprising congressional primary out in El Paso this month.
Well, for those who know, Beto O'Rourke is not so surprising. This is a young gentleman who just presents himself so well. He comes across as a dignified gentleman, a human being, and he attracted a lot of support and some.
And he's been on the city council there for how long?
2 terms, I think it was. He retired, or however you'd say it, left the council so he could run for office, focus his attention. I heard he knocked on thousands upon thousands of doors, introduced himself, and within drug reform, there is a certain degree of pride in that we helped this gentleman because he says he's going to help us present our case for change.
He was one of the movers behind the El Paso City Council resolution calling for a re-examination of the drug laws. But
and if I could fill in, that was a unanimous vote from the El Paso City Council. It went to the mayor, who rejected it, sent it back to them, and then Beto's opponent in this election, Sylvester Reyes, the then or still incumbent congressman from that district, wrote the council and said, if you vote on this again, that the funding...
I'll make sure that you get no more federal funding.
Yeah, El Paso is going to suffer. And I think that backfired, that particular circumstance backfired.
That's part of what was so surprising. because Reyes, as a long-term, solid member of Congress with, for years, no opposition at all.
8 terms.
8 terms. He's a former DEA agent, an extremely strong war on drugs supporter. And I'm sure he felt like he was untouchable.
Yeah, yeah. But the well, again, Ciudad Juarez, you got to understand, is just across the river from.
Well, it's really one city with a river down the middle.
Well, this is true. Yeah. But they have lost contact with their friends and relatives.
Yeah.
The people in El Paso have found that it's just too damn scary to go across the river as often, or if ever, these days.
Oh, once again, back to my high school days, we used to take out in the car from Lubbock, drive nonstop down to Juarez for a weekend partying, and back to school in horrible shape on Monday morning.
and you know, the cool thing was back then, as bad as and corrupt as the police can be on that side, taking bribes and little snitching if you're smuggling, they also took care of those kids. They made sure that they didn't get killed while they were over there. Maybe they get in a fight or whatever, but they did protect those drunken follies, if you will, right?
Yeah, yeah.
And they can't even protect themselves these days.
Yeah,
yeah.
But part of that, the Americans keep insisting on handing about $30 billion a year to the bad guys to spend on hiring assassins and buying guns and
having the means whereby they can then extort and kidnap and corrupt and just continue gaining power. And again, the $30 billion a year is you think of it over the lifetime of the drug war. That's hundreds of billions
of dollars
that they've garnered.
Yeah, and there was a primary here in Houston, and I suspect the city is going to end up regretting the outcome of this one. And this was the defeat of Pat Lycos in her primary for the district attorney's office.
As much as she and I disagreed, Pat Lycos and I.
I mean, she's no friend of mine.
No, but compared to her probable replacement, we will miss her.
Yeah.
And over the past few weeks, months, I've been sending books to Pat Lycos.
Yeah.
The marijuana conviction, which gives the history of the drug war, because she always said she didn't know where the laws came from.
Yeah.
And the other was Michelle Alexander's book, The New Jim Crow.
Yeah.
And I feel like I just had her educated, and now she's gone. So,
well, and part of what disturbs me is apparently one of the big motives in the election was her decision not to prosecute trace amount drug cases,
which saved us countless man hours.
Yeah, saved us millions, and has been largely instrumental on a lot of the turnarounds with the jail overcrowding situation.
Yep.
But it got the police unions up in arms against her.
They didn't want those easy busts to go away.
They used, basically they were using those Mickey Mouse meaningless drug busts for 3 things. The first, it's what a lot of us have sneeringly called a contempt of cop law. You say something the officer doesn't like, or he doesn't like your attitude, he's going to find something Mickey Mouse to bust you with, make you spend a few nights in jail, and maybe even have to pay for a lawyer, just because you didn't treat him like he thought you should. The second thing they used it for was it gave them a great strong arm to force people into becoming snitches, or to even run the risk of harm or death serving as an undercover in a buy-bust. And the third is every one of those Mickey Mouse little arrests gave the arresting officer several hours of overtime pay. So what we have here is the police union trying to control what the district attorney's office is doing. And it's supposed to be the other way around. The reason we have civilian control of the military, the old saying is that war is too important to be left to the generals. Yeah. The reason why we have an elected DA and an elected mayor is that law enforcement is too important to be left to the police. We need to make sure that we keep that civilian control, civilian oversight where it is, and keep it strong, keep it transparent. And I've got to admit that Ms. Lycos did not run an effective, strong campaign, but I still think that she got beat for all of the wrong reasons.
Yeah. Well, if her Republican, the winner of the Republican nomination, gets elected, then he's going to return us to the days when our jails are overflowing. We're going to have busloads being shipped every day of the week to Louisiana. I mean,
and when we were trying everybody for everything, coming up with capital cases that had no business being capital cases, a district attorney's office that was rampant with racial and sexual discrimination. This guy keeps talking about wanting to go back to the days of Chuck Rosenthal. You know, Chuck Rosenthal basically got run out of office, and it happened years too late.
Yeah, yeah, way too late. Well, a lot of folks don't remember it was his pill abuse that he used as an excuse to get out of. I don't know, there was something hanging over his head at that moment.
Don't you think that maybe they should have arrested him for narcotics violations?
It would stand to reason, wouldn't it?
If pill abuse was the problem.
Yeah, but for him, as it is for so many people with money or power, that, oh, I have a problem with drugs, let me go to treatment or let me get some sort of help. Don't need to put me in jail. Rush Limbaugh being a classic example of that.
Well, Rush, Mr. Oxycontin Limbaugh is one example, but how many big-time millionaire entertainment business celebrities have been in and out of rehab through a revolving door?
Well, you could talk to the members of Aerosmith, it'd be about a mile long, that list. But, no, you're absolutely right. Well, we're wrapping it up here. I just want to urge folks to please tune in this coming Sunday, 6:30 p.m. to 90.1 FM. We'll be talking to Bill King. We'll have a host of other segments to share with you.
Okay. Thank you for joining us, Dean. And remember, they're your politicians, but you've got to tell them what you expect them to do. So keep those letters going out to your representatives. And we'll see you next time.
Bye, y'all.
We have these private prisons that have now hired lobbyists to go get minimum mandatory review.
I began to understand that the 17 or the 19-year-old kid I had in the backseat of my police car was not a criminal at all.
Remove the profit motive. If you remove the profit motive, you can do away with almost all these problems. And how do you do that? Simple. The end prohibition, which can only mean one thing. Legalize drugs. Legalize all drugs.
If we really want to improve our urban neighborhoods, the most important thing that we could do, the single most important thing that we could do, is end the war on drugs.